Welcome back to the shack. It's part 2, continuing on straight away. I'm limiting these videos to 5 minutes, so there we go, 5 minutes on the clock. Let's go. So continuing on from where we left off, the aperture is similar to the shutter, except it's in the lens itself. This is in the camera body, and this shutter is actually, the aperture is in the actual lens itself. So you've got typically between 7 and 11 kind of elements, and again it's like they're pieces of metal that slide in, and it's like, how can I put it, like fingers like this if you like, and then they kind of fall apart or come in. That's not a really good explanation. It might be like effect like this where you're kind of opening up and closing it. Anyway, get the idea kind of, I hope. The bigger that opening is, so the wider that the aperture is, all the metal pieces are near the edge, the bigger the light source is, the more light goes in. And obviously the reverse, when it's a little tiny hole, so all of the veins have come back in, covering over and only leaving a tiny little opening, that's when you've got a small aperture. So obviously large aperture, small over here. It's tiny opening, only a little bit of light gets in, not much at all, which is a similar effect to what we've talked about with the ISO. So if you have a small aperture and a low ISO speed, it's going to take ages for the sensor to pick up the light change from black to white and expose it correctly. It's going to take ages. So for these lower ISO film speeds or ISO settings, you typically might need to have a larger aperture to let more light in, so it will react more quickly to the light. Reverse goes for these faster film speeds or ISO settings. You typically want to have a smaller setting, so you let less light in, so it doesn't make it go completely white sooner than what you want. So typically you'll have a high ISO or fast film speed and a small aperture, or a very slow film speed or ISO and a very large aperture. And it depends on the effect that you want, on how you change all of that. So anyway, let's continue on. So the lens, that's the aperture. The lens focal length, this is really interesting. So focal length is the millimeters typically of the lens. So you know how you get the 24 to 107 millimeter telephoto lenses? It's got a way of basically making the lens. I'll show you on this camera here. This is a 22 mil lens. Okay, so the sensor's there. On the camera, you'll see that little symbol there. I'm going to put it really close so you can see it. That little symbol there, that is for the film plane, or where the sensor sits. And you can see that the sensor recessed back there is in line with that film plane indicator. That tells you where the film plane is, and it tells you that from the surface of that rear element on the lens, this focal length being 22 millimeters, 22 millimeters is the distance between that surface of the lens to the sensor. 22 millimeters. That gives you the angle of the field of view. Now it's different. So 22 millimeters is the focal length, and the field of view is going to be something like, gosh, it's going to be pretty wide. It's going to be like a 40, 50 degree kind of field of view. This camera that we've got here is a 210 degree field of view. That's what you can see. That's why it's two of them, one front, one at the back. It gives you 360 degree view overlapped as well. So the distance between the sensor and the rear element of the lens is what the focal length is. And the further you get that distance, the greater the effect of the telephoto zoom-in ratio is, and the narrower the field of view becomes. So the bigger the number in terms of 107 millimeter telephoto lens means you've got a lesser field of view, narrower, but you see further. So the magnification increases and the field of view decreases, which makes sense when you think about it. So all it's doing is, so those telephoto lenses, they have a mechanism in here which actually internally moves the surface of that rear element further away. And reverse for the macro lenses, it brings it closer and closer and closer and closer. Dang, that's another 5 minutes. Okay, let's continue in the next one. I'll stop this and stop that. Bye-bye now.